This is a tutorial. I like to talk more about transfer Rhino model into Twinmotion. You should definitely watch the old one to understand the basic workflow. For the new one, I really want to focus a little bit about polygon control, as well as hard edge, soft edge, and UV mapping. Okay. So first, this is a sub-D model I created last time, and I put this into 0, 0. Just make sure it's close to 0, 0. And the unit is centimeter. So here, if I type distance, you can see this object is about 8 meters high. So make sure it's on right scale. And also, it's pretty close to 0, 0. Okay. The second thing I want to talk quickly is the polygon number. So here, if I go to properties and then click details, you can see this object has 75,000 vertices, 35,000 faces. So that is, not a very high poly geometry. So I will transfer this into Twinmotion and see how that looks like. And there are a couple of things I like to talk here. So first, by default, if you create this in Wavebird and bake a mesh, the mesh automatically have a soft edge. So you can see this boundary is kind of not sharp. So if you do want to make this really sharp, you can make a duplication and use a command called unweld. So basically, this will break apart the vertices. If you have multiple vertices joined in one place, it will break apart into multiple. So after I unweld all the points, all the edges became hard edge. You can tell this from the details. You can see the vertex number is significantly bigger, more than the previous version. The benefit is if I transfer this into Twinmotion later, you can tell the difference. So here I will just using data smith, I will export into 3D view. Okay. Oh, actually, before I do that, I will just do one more duplication. Okay. So in this new duplication, instead of using unweld, I will actually use weld. Okay. And then I can control how I wanna create a smoothness between the angles. So if you give a really large number, 180 degrees, so most of the flat surface will be smoothed. But for the sharp edges, if you keep as the hard edge. So this is the kind of tricky way to do the weld, but give a tolerance. Okay. So they will give a different soft and hard edge. I do want to mention is in Rhino, if you go to properties, there is a property called soft edge editing. This one is really good if you want to do renderings internally in Rhino. But if you really transfer this file outside Rhino environment, like to Unreal, Unity, or Twinmotion, these values might not be recognized. So just keep in mind, we're kind of doing an old school way, using the weld and unweld as a way to manipulate the hard edge and the soft edge. Okay, so I will transfer this into Twinmotion. To do that, I'm pretty sure you have to just search plugin Twinmotion Rhino, so you can download these plugins for Twinmotion, the Rhino plugin. Okay, so once you're installed in Rhino, you should be able to see a tag called datasmith. You are able to synchronize or export. In my case, I will do export. There's no big difference. So I will do export. I will do a datasmith file and click save. Okay, so basically you exported this into Twinmotion. And here in the Twinmotion, I already actually created this file by importing, right? I will just do this really quick. And then I point to this datasmith file and click import. Right. Keep in mind, this will input the entire model, the 3 models, into Twinmotion, right? So I would always recommend if you want to clean up your model, delete everything you don't need, then only transfer the model you need. Okay, and you can tell the difference. The first model is the default waveform baked model, so all the edges looks pretty smooth, right? You can see the hard edge is not there. In the second version, because I did unweld, so all the edges became hard. Even this, the edges on the flat surface, they still became hard edges. So you can decide which style you like, right? Soft or hard. The third one is actually the best one. You can see the flat edges on the surface is smooth, but this kind of intersection corner became hard edge, right? So the green version might be the best choice, right? So here the reason is I did this by welding. I use really large degree. If you really want to dig into what exactly the angle, the tolerance means, I would recommend you just go to the Rhino help menu. You can search, there's a command called edge soften property, and here there is a description on the threshold. So basically threshold, if you take 0 degree, that means the edge will be smooth if the two neighboring faces facing exactly the same orientation, right? But if they're facing a different orientation, there's an angle between these two normal directions. That angle will dictate if this edge should be rendered as a soft edge or as a hard edge, right? This is called threshold. Okay, so this is the basic. So you have this in Twinmotion. It looks pretty nice. Okay. Another thing I like to talk really quick is when you apply the material, right? So here, if I apply a material, and if I want some kind of patterns, for example, wood, I want to, using this wood material. So if I apply this to this object, this object show up the materials, but if I apply to another one, this one, the material, the texture doesn't show up, right? This is a concept I like to talk more. This is related to the UV mapping. So for instance, if I go to, I don't know, maybe wall coverage, if I find a texture like this one with a very strong, stucco-like, if I apply, it showed up here, right? Kind of like a stucco. But here, if I apply, it doesn't show up, right? The reason is the UV mapping. So let me talk quickly what is UV mapping and why we use it. So by default, when you create the geometry and then in the properties, if you go to the texture mapping, there's not really a mapping channel available. Well, there is a default called unnamed surface mapping. It's not really gonna work in other program. So you have to manually apply a UV mapping. The best practice is using the box mapping. So here, if I click apply a box mapping, if you pay attention to the command line, you are able to actually draw a box. Right? So here, let me just switch to the shaded mode. So here you are able to just draw a box. Right? So this box became the widget, or sometimes called gizmo, to control the scale of the texture. And then you can choose this option, capped, yes. Mapping channel is 1, yes, right? Enter, finished. So what happened is in the property, you will see this new channel, this is called a UV channel, has a box mapping there. You can also tell the scale is kind of large, right? It's about 3 meters, 5 meters. So this is how you create a UV mapping. If you want to delete this UV mapping, you can click this delete, or if you can, do other manipulations. For instance, if you want to see this UV mapping or hide this UV mapping, you can click this show. This will show up, or you can do hide. It will disappear. Okay. So the point is, you want to have these 3 objects all applied some box UV mapping. So I already did for the first 2. You can tell it has a box. The first one has a box, right? So once you do that, then you can re-export into data Smith. So I will overwrite the original one. The nice thing about Twinmotion is even I'm not using synchronize, right? Since I'm using the same data Smith file, so here I can just click refresh. Basically, will refresh the file. Once you refresh, if I zoom in, right, you'll see the texture show up for the numbers 3, right? So because UV mapping is correct, this will become really handy. In the future, if you apply a different texture, you can always see if I'm using, for example, plastic, I will apply to this guy, right? You can see the texture will show up, and I can control the scale. You can see this box mapping gonna kick in and dictate the scale of it. Okay, so you can see the scale will be controlled with this box mapping. Cool. I will actually open the file I created earlier just to show you the final result. So here I added a couple of people, I add some trees. I also add a tree here in the middle of this white version. It's kind of like a weird garden. Has a tree going through this light well. Then for this, because I did this UV mapping, right, I'm able to apply the material directly here. Then I can, change the scale of it. Yeah, and you can always see the whole, library of the materials currently used. If you don't want to use it again, you can drag and drop to, swap back to the original one. Or you can use in this, material picker. You can pick the green. So this will be the current material, the green one. You can do some adjustment like reflections. You can make it super reflective, right? And of course, you can add other materials. So there's many options here. I did a really quick assembling, for the interior space. So I put the people here. I put a bunch of furniture in. So basic interface of Twinmotion. I don't cover here again, but you should definitely try it. When you do the move, right? If you click this unfold, you have other options like scale, rotate. Just play with it. It's pretty straightforward. Right? If I want to use scale, I can scale this sofa. All right, I think that is the basics of how you can bring a Rhino file into Twinmotion, and then you can control, you can manipulate the objects, you can play with the material. The key point is just make sure you understand the UV mapping. The UV mapping tool is also available in a render tag, and here you can see this is there, right? The UV mapping. Keep in mind, the Rhino has a really cool, rendering features such as thickness, edge softening, but unfortunately, all of these advanced features is only available for internal rendering. So if you export to other program, this not really gonna be recognized. So that's the reason we did Weld and Unweld to control the hard edge of these edges. All right, I hope this will be